Willkommen, bienvenue, and welcome back to Scrap Mechanic with Lyte. Today we're going to be talking about torque. The basics of torque, a couple unexpected results, but I will not be telling you exactly how much you can haul at what speed with what engine. So if you came here for that, don't have that just yet. Might be the next episode, might be two down the line. It's pretty hard to measure without just slapping some wheels on a giant brick of metal and adding metal until it stops. And I haven't done a lot of working with time yet, so measuring time reliably and things of that sort. Once I set up a good way of recording videos and watching them back quickly, I'll likely work on those. But for now, we're going to be working on torque itself and some particularly interesting results regarding multiple engines attached on the same axle. So like the manual transmission, semi-automatic transmission, multiple engine car thing. How much torque you get from adding multiple engines. So let's get started. It makes noise. Okay, starting off, to do anything with torque, you have to understand rotation and balance. So, angular momentum and things of that sort, well, there are three terms you need. You need torque, you need speed of rotation, and you need horsepower. Horsepower does work. The speed of rotation times the torque is the horsepower. So those are the words you need for when we're working down there with the engines. Here, we're going to do some of the basics of angular momentum. When you've got weight and force of some sort pushing down on an arm like this, where there's a fulcrum, like this, or like a bearing, we'll see lots of bearings down there, it creates a torque going this way. Well, on this side, we have a torque going this way. So clockwise, counterclockwise, anti-clockwise for you folk across the pond, I guess. I'm not sure who says anti-clockwise. But clock, counterclock, they're equal, and thus no rotation. We've got 5 wood and 1 metal. They weigh the same. They're the same distance from this fulcrum, so they just sit there, totally balanced. If we remove one, boop, it should start moving. But again, Scrap Mechanic has, well, sleep mechanics, where the thing just doesn't wake up until there's a significant change. And even then, sometimes it falls asleep at weird times. So even this sort of balance is not 100% reliable, but it's reliable enough for these demonstrations. So over here, we've got something that is also balanced. But it's 1 wood and 1 metal. Metal weighs 5 times as much, but it's still balancing out the wood, because the wood is further out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 versus 1. So 5 times 1, 1 times 5 totally balances out. Great. Nice and straightforward. So if you've got different things that weigh different amounts, if you change the proportion of one side to the other, you can make them balance. Now, at some point it might become infeasible to get the fulcrum close enough to the heavy object to make it work, but it is what it is. Next up, we have something a little more complicated. Still the same process, though. The wood weighs 1, it's at position 5. 5 times 4 is 20. Over here we've got stone, which weighs 2. A stone at 5 is 10, plus a stone at 4, so that's 10 plus 8. 18, plus a stone at 1, plus 2 is 20. 20 effective torque this way, 20 effective torque the other way. Totally balanced. This is a slightly mathy episode for the first part. All the numbers go away. Don't worry. And here we go. Our last example, because all of these have been one density versus another density. One versus the other. One density versus the other. Here, we mix all of our friendly densities together, and we have the same blocks on both sides. So we've got 1 metal, 1 stone, and 2 wood. 1 metal, 1 stone, 2 wood. So 5 plus 2 is 7, plus 2 is 9, at 4 is 36. Let's double check that math. 5 plus 2 is 7, plus 1 is 8, plus 1 is 9, times 4 is 36. And we come over here. Let's do it from this end in. 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, times 5 is 25, plus 4 is 29, plus 3 times 2 is 6. We were at 29, right? Plus 6 is 35, plus 1 is 36. Woohoo! It balances. If you do this math, it'll all work out great. And this is kind of important because this is the essence of angular momentum and torque. This is what your engines have to deal with. But there's another interesting phenomenon where this angular momentum has to be conserved. Now, this is in reality, so we have to test it in scrap mechanic, but we've got that rig right over here. So we've got the thrusters, which will make this thing spin. The central bearing is unpowered, so it can free spin when you stop the thrusters. So the thrusters get it going. Spin, 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 spin. You push the button. Oh, come on now. There we go. Sometimes it gets weird effects when you shut them off. But in general, it's supposed to spin and then free spin after you're done. Now, we've got these extra arms. These are made of metal, so they're very, very heavy. And we've got this button here, which retracts them. Now, it's not supposed to cause any movement, but weird things can happen with the mechanics of this game. The overall movement is essentially none, but it's a weird thing that happens. But it does demonstrate conservation of angular momentum. So when we are spinning it around, we have an effective weight that is quite a lot, because this metal is very far out. When we pull it in, we need to keep that effective weight when it's spinning around. Well, that's not true. The effective weight goes way down, but the energy necessary to spin it stays the same. So the energy spinning it doesn't change because, I mean, it's still the same. But once we lift the arms, so let's lift the arms, it speeds up, because the same energy can move this faster than it could move them when they were stretched out. So think to yourself, what would happen when I put them up and then pull them back down? What effect will pulling them back down have? It slows it way down real fast. So you can see it spins quite a bit faster with the arms up than with the arms down. And even if you cut the power, it spins it faster when the arms are up. You might have seen this phenomenon before, because there are certain types of, how should I say, stylized movement that take advantage of this phenomenon. Namely, breakdancing and figure skating. If you've ever seen someone go from a very spread out sort of maneuver, and then suddenly they seem to be going faster without adding any extra effort. So if you've got a big breakdancer who's doing wide sweeps and things of that sort, and then flip up onto their head and extend perfectly straight, and suddenly they're spinning like mad, but not actually pushing off more, this is what makes it happen. You end up having quite a bit of angular momentum with your arms and legs flailing around quite a bit, but then when you pull them in, well, you have to keep the momentum, so it ends up getting turned into speed. It's pretty awesome. So that's balance. We've got conservation of angular momentum, and here, this I just wanted to show because I don't remember seeing anyone actually test it. It's just a test to see whether or not bearings have friction, because we've always assumed to this point that the bearings have friction, because you put a thing on it, and then you hit it with a hammer, and the thing stops spinning. I mean, we kind of assume that the bearings caused that. Potentially the air or time, but most people would blame the bearings. They would blame the friction that's going on here. But alas, there is no friction. Look at those things go. I mean, they can barely render well enough to actually come into being. And this top bit, see, unpowered bearings, nothing keeping it together, but this top bit, not moving at all. There is no energy being transferred from this madly spinning thing into this top bit. It's pretty awesome. So we know there is no friction in the bearings. None. So any effects that you get are not from friction. So you came here for torque. Let's work on some torque. We're going to start off with some comparative torque tests, and then we'll get to some unexpected results down the end. First, we're going to work with controllers. This controller is set to 1 degree and 360 degrees to test whether or not how much it tries to move has an effect on its torque. And the answer is no. I mean, they kind of break the bearing a bit. There's enough force there to pull them off their mountings a little, but neither one pushes through the other. Now, we're working strictly with torque. If this got speed, if you had rotation speed going, well, then the weight of the object and the speed that it's going could push its way through a slower moving object of the same mass. But that's not what we're testing. We're just testing the power of one pushing through the other. And here, it's a tie. So, what about one that is set to fast and one that's set to slow? They've got the same angle, but it doesn't matter. One set to fast, one set to slow. It's a tie. You'd kind of expect this, but you gotta test it. You gotta know for a fact that the angle doesn't matter and the speed doesn't matter. Okay, so over here we've got two electric engines. One set to 1, one set to 9. Just to make sure that electric engines, this happens sometimes because the pieces are not actually touching. So the pieces aren't touching one another when the world loads. There's ever so slight of a gap between the two. And that's enough for the 9 to pick up enough speed to just clip right through. And that's no good. So what we're going to do instead, I had been doing some testing in this world earlier, but I exited before recording, which is quite often a bad plan. So what we're going to do, we're going to start it off at 1. At 1, it's a tie. At 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way up, it's still a tie. No change. So long as they start together. If they're even the slightest bit apart, the 9 can get enough speed to cause a problem. Knock this right out of the way. But when measuring just the torque, so no speed involved, the level on the electric engines doesn't matter. So we're going to come over here to gas engines. Now this one, we're going to start at 1 together because these can go haywire real fast. So we just start it up, and at 1, they're fine. They just push against each other. It's great. And then we move to 2, and 2 wins. 2 pushes right through 1. This is a slightly unexpected result for me because whenever anyone talks about these engines, they kind of assume all of the levels have the same torque, and that these have high torque, low speed, these have high speed, low torque. Well, 2 has more torque than 1. So let's reset. Really? There we go. We are reset at 2 and 2. And then we go to 3. And 3 wins. So these engines, as you increase the power of the engine, you are also increasing its torque, not just its speed. So that could have some serious implications when designing vehicles, because these, as you set them to higher and higher speeds, you get more and more torque, which allows you to handle the weight better at those higher speeds. So that's awesome, I think, but it's up to you. Next up, highly requested. Does having multiple bearings increase the torque? So this would increase the speed. We know that. But does it increase the torque? And the answer is... oh, again, we started it too high. Just doing this for anticipation, right? Oh, they didn't align. So let's turn it off. Let's set up a controller and reset it back to normal. Oh, right, this one is out of angle as well. Okay, so we disconnect. I wanted to have it set at 9 because it would be a greater, better demonstration of what was going on. But yeah, we should probably start it at 1. So, drum roll again. Nothing. There is no increase in torque by having multiple powered bearings in series. So it is now up at 9. Again, we had that little gap, so it went crazy. But when there's no gap, 9 on 9, plus 9, I don't know how you want to say it, but having the 2 bearings powered at 9 on electric, still same exact torque between the two. So just 1 versus 2, same torque. And just to be certain, one should always test it with both engines, just in case they act differently. So there goes that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Still balanced. 1 versus 2. I know you're hoping for a different result, but it is what it is. The torque of the engine is the torque of the engine, and if one of them can't push, having an extra one isn't going to help. Ooh, this one came unset. Get back to being set. Here, we've got an electric engine versus a controller, because now we're doing comparative testing. We want to know what is stronger than the others. So we've got an electric engine versus a controller. The controller's set at like 15 degrees, and the controller pushes right through it. So controllers have more torque than electric engines, but they're also slower. Seems like a reasonable trade-off. Over here, we've got an electric engine, doesn't matter what speed, and a gas engine, super strong. Now, again, due to high power issues, this might go crazy. Yep. Always goes a little crazy. So, I think we need to dial it back just a little. Reset. Okay, now we're going to start it. Oh, it's still too high. So this one, it's very hard to demonstrate because it needs to get into a good position first. Let's see if we can twist it just a little. This way and that way. Okay, now we remove the connection. Reset the connection. Oh, but that straightened them back out again. It might be good. It's very hard to get this running and such that it actually lines up. Because you see how it's just phasing through existence? It might be because I'm recording. Oh, that was good. Let's try to catch that on camera again. Okay, so let's get on an onion box so we can see it better. And what we're going to do... No, that's way worse. Maybe if we duck, you can see it better. No. It's always... Ooh, that's a good idea. So we're going to go up. But we can't fall down. Jump. There we go. So we're going to start it going, so you can see it at the top of the screen. Once it makes contact, we're going to kick it all the way up, and it still passes right through. But it's ever so barely, and it's still moving. There we go. So, we needed to catch it just right. But when perfectly in line and not moving, the strength of a Power 9 gas engine is equal to that of an electric. Due to the buggy physics, it's kind of hard to get it in the exact situation to show that they are exactly equal. But worst case, electric is a little bit stronger than gas. Worst case. But it seems that the top level gas has the same amount of torque as the electric. It's a great result for people who like the gas engines. Bad result for people who like electric, because that was the main selling point of the electric. It's the amount of torque it has. But alas, really strong gas has the same torque and more speed. So if you really, really want a fast-moving, ground-based vehicle that's not using thrusters, gas might be the way to go if you can control a full-level gas engine. Don't know if you can, but if you can, good for you. Now we should be able to turn this back on. Yeah, because once you get it exactly where it needs to be, it'll stay there. And the torques balance. It's just hard to get it there. And last but not least, we've got one more test. Because these tests right here were not strictly definitive. We showed that 2 electrics are not stronger than 1, and 2 gases are not stronger than 1. But what if you mix electric and gas? I get asked this all the time. What happens when you mix electric and gas? Do you get the best of both? And the answer is no, you don't. The connections here are a little bit of a spider web, but you can see the gas is attached to both. The electric is attached to this one. So the amount of torque is the same as a level 1 gas engine, which is way less than an electric at any speed. All it does is make this spin instead of that. So if you integrate this into, say, a car, and you need more torque, well, you'll have the torque, I believe, of the least torqueful engine that's engaged. So, unfortunately, here, well, you have the torque of the gas, which is not much, even though you've got the electric going. Now, just for good measure, we ought to disconnect these and reconnect them in the other order. I didn't test this because I just thought of it right now, but this should be the same result. Oh, but they're facing the wrong way! Oh. Come on, hit each other. Nah, we need to reset it. So we set a thing, we disconnect all of it, try it again. Okay, so all reset. We set this low, just for good measure. We attach. That's not where we want it. We want it on top. Flip. Attach, flip, attach, flip. Now we push the button, and we get the same results. It doesn't matter the order that you put them in. The electric still doesn't give you the torque you need. It ends up torquing, because for every action there's an opposite reaction, so torquing this also torques that. And this torque overpowers the torque coming from this one. So this engine tries to torque, but it just doesn't have enough. This electric beats that gas and leads to this block spinning instead of those. Now, we could have inferred those results without necessarily testing it, but again, testing is where it's at. You want to make sure things work the way you expect them to, because you don't necessarily know how this is implemented, how the torques and counter torques actually are programmed to work, if they're programmed to work. But this fairly clearly shows how the electric overrides the gas, and if you increase the speed of the electric, you increase the speed of the rotating block that you don't want to be rotating. So this is a relatively comprehensive look at the basics of torque in scrap mechanic. It might not address some of the issues you have with torque, because it doesn't give you any numbers. It doesn't say, use this engine to do that, do this to do the other thing. But it does give you some insight into what is not going to work. If you need more power to move your vehicle, or move your elevator, or move your elephant, adding additional axles, like additional bearings on the same axle, will give you no extra power. If anything, it might give you less. That you wanted to get the power from the electric and the speed from the gas, you're going to be out of luck. You're better off just using the gas at a higher setting. If that's still not enough, we'll eventually test the effect of multiple wheels distributing the weight. And there might be some other interesting methods for counteracting your problem, because if you add thrusters pointing up to make your thing weigh less, it might work. There might be other fancy tricks, but for the most part, just remember, this is not going to work. It's a shame. The other unintuitive results, the gas motor, the higher the level, the higher the torque, in addition to the higher speeds. Controllers, it doesn't matter the angle or the speed, they are the same torque regardless. Electrics, more power, same torque, more speed. Electrics are weaker than controllers. The electrics are the same strength as the max level gas, but the gas themselves vary by level. Bearings, no friction. when calculating balance, you have to take distance into account. At some point, we will need to test not just straight out, but also diagonally. Does it work with nice Euclidean geometry, where it has to work in a circle? Or is it a weird Manhattan distance sort of thing, where you go over 1 and over 1, and that's 2, instead of the square root of 2? I can't imagine that it would work with Manhattan distance, because you can rotate things like this, but it's hard to work with circles when you don't have round blocks. But in general, you can probably expect the geometry to be nice and Euclidean, but that'll make balancing in other sorts of angles, so balancing at 45 degrees from here, a little more difficult. Should be feasible, but it'll be difficult because if you have something that rotates about the axis you want to balance, well, you can run into some troubles. Despite the frictionless bearings, things still do come to a stop, so it might be air resistance, might just be time. And when you decrease the radius, you increase the speed. Whee! It's not very noticeable because it kind of seems like there might be a speed limit on this, but it is what it is. So that's all for this episode on torque. Hope you learned a couple of things. Hopefully any of it is useful. I certainly know the gas thing will be useful for me. Feel free to leave any questions, comments, suggestions in the comments. I do plan on doing a follow-up on torque on actual measurements of it once I know how to accurately measure it without friction, because the friction still is not reliable. Any other things you'd love to see, feel free to leave a comment. I've got a couple of contraptions in mind, but I've really been digging the physics lately, so I'm going to keep plugging away at the physics. I'll get to the contraptions eventually. But I will see you in the next episode of Scrap Mechanic with Lyte.